There's a place in Australia where the worst of the worst are kept. A prison so secure, so feared, that even hardened criminals whisper its name in terror. This isn't just any prison. This is a place designed to break the unbreakable, to contain the most dangerous men in the country. Men who have killed, men who have terrorized entire cities, and men who, even behind bars, still manage to commit murder. Welcome to Goulburn Supermax. But here's what most people don't know. This fortress of concrete and steel wasn't always a supermax. And the story of how it became one is darker than you might imagine. Let me take you to a small city about 200 kilometers southwest of Sydney. Goulburn. Population, roughly 24,000 people. Rolling hills. Quiet streets. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. But drive to the edge of town, and you'll see something that doesn't belong. Something massive. Something menacing. Walls that stretch 30 feet high. Razor wire coiled in endless spirals. Security cameras watching every angle. This is Goulburn Correctional Center. And buried deep within it, like a prison within a prison, is the Supermax. It all started back in 1884 when Goulburn Prison first opened its doors. For over 100 years, it was a regular prison for regular criminals. Nothing special. But something changed in the 1990s. Something terrible. Overcrowding had become a crisis in Australian prisons. And inside Goulburn, something was brewing that would turn it into what newspapers called the killing fields. Picture this. You're a prison guard in 1996. You hear shouting. You turn a corner, and you see blood on the concrete. An inmate is motionless. Another stands over him with a makeshift weapon. Between 1996 and 1998, 6 inmates were murdered inside Goulburn. 6. In just 2 years. Some were stabbed with homemade knives, others beaten to death with gym weights. The violence was brutal, calculated, and unstoppable. Why? The answer lies in race. Different groups had formed inside. Aboriginal inmates on one side, Lebanese and Middle Eastern inmates on another. Each protecting their own. Each willing to kill for respect and survival. The officials were losing control. Then came the escape attempt. In March 1998, 4 inmates rushed the fence. They climbed, they fought off guards. For a moment, it looked like they might make it. But the response was swift. The escape was crushed, but the message was clear. Goulburn wasn't working. Something had to change. So, the government made a decision that would change Goulburn forever. They would build a supermax. A fortress where escape would be impossible. A place where Australia's most dangerous men would spend the rest of their lives. The supermax opened in 2001. It's built like a bunker. Concrete walls reinforced with steel. Cells are tiny, about the size of a small bathroom, with a steel bed bolted to the floor and a steel toilet sink combo. The doors are solid steel, controlled remotely. It's designed like a Russian doll. A prison within a prison within a prison. Escape is not an option. You don't just get sent here for committing a crime. You have to be a threat to the entire prison system itself. Maybe you've killed someone while already in prison. Maybe you're running a crime syndicate from behind bars. Inmates spend 22 to 23 hours a day in their cell. Alone. 1 hour of exercise in a small concrete yard, also alone. It's the end of the line. So who ends up here? You've probably heard of Ivan Milat, the backpacker serial killer. After being caught, he was a problem inmate. Violent, manipulative, always trying to escape. When the Supermax opened, he was one of the first ones in. He spent the rest of his life there, dying in 2019. But then there's Bassam Hamzy. In Sydney's underworld, he's a legend not for what he did before prison, but what he did inside it. Sentenced for a shooting in 1998, Hamzy founded a crime network called Brothers for Life from his cell. He was allegedly orchestrating drug trafficking and shootings across Sydney, all while locked up. They moved him to Goulburn Supermax, thinking isolation would stop him. They were wrong. Even from the most secure prison in Australia, Hamzy allegedly continued to run his empire, smuggling out messages and using corrupt staff. How is that possible? That's a story that exposed one of the biggest scandals in Australian prison history. If you're fascinated by true crime and want to see more deep dives into the world's most dangerous places, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Here's something you need to understand about the Supermax. It's not just about keeping people in. It's about breaking them down. Imagine spending 23 hours a day in a room the size of a parking space. No human contact, except for brief exchanges with guards through a slot in the door. No direct sunlight, Just what filters through a tiny window. And no privacy. Cameras are on you constantly. Even when you shower. Even when you use the toilet. The silence is crushing. The isolation eats away at your mind. Days blur into weeks, months, and then years. Some inmates manage to adapt. They find routines, exercise in their cells, read whatever they can get their hands on, and hold on to their sanity by sheer willpower. But others break. There have been reports of inmates screaming through the night, banging on doors until their hands bleed, talking to themselves, losing track of time, of reality, of who they even are. Mental health experts have called this kind of prolonged solitary confinement a form of torture. The United Nations has stated that anything more than 15 days can cause permanent psychological damage. Some inmates in the Goulburn Supermax have been in solitary for years, a few for over a decade. Is it justified? When you're dealing with serial killers, with men who have murdered even inside other prisons, with crime bosses running entire organizations from their cells, is this level of isolation truly necessary? That's a question Australia has been debating for years, and there's no easy answer. But here's what makes the story of Goulburn Supermax even more complicated, even more troubling. Despite all the security, despite all the isolation, despite being Australia's most secure prison, the Supermax has never been completely escape-proof. I'm not talking about inmates breaking out. That's never happened. The physical security is just too strong. I'm talking about something else. Something that security cameras and concrete walls can't stop. Information getting out and contraband getting in. Let me tell you about what happened in 2015. Prison guards were doing a routine sweep of the Supermax when they found something strange. A hidden package. Inside was a mobile phone, SIM cards, chargers, and drugs, steroids, to be specific. How did it get there? This is one of the most secure facilities in the world. Every visitor is screened. Every item is checked. Every piece of mail is inspected. Nothing should get through. But something did. Investigators reviewed security footage. They tracked movements. They interviewed staff. And then they discovered the truth. The package didn't come through the front door. It didn't come through the mail or with visitors. It came from the sky. Someone had used a drone to fly contraband over the walls and drop it right into the Supermax exercise yard. Under the cover of darkness, the drone flew in, dropped its payload, and flew out. Simple, effective, and terrifying. It was a huge wake-up call. Technology had changed, and the Supermax needed to change with it. Security was immediately enhanced. Drone detection systems were installed, netting was placed over outdoor areas, and surveillance was increased. But the damage was done. The myth of the impenetrable Supermax had been shattered. And this leads us to one of the darkest chapters in Goulburn's history. A scandal that would rock the entire New South Wales prison system. A scandal involving the very people trusted to keep the Supermax secure, the guards. Over the years, there have been multiple investigations into corruption at Goulburn. Guards accused of smuggling contraband, passing messages for inmates, and taking bribes from criminal organizations. In 2019, one guard was arrested for allegedly smuggling drugs into the prison, hidden in various items. This wasn't a one-time thing. It had been going on for months. Another investigation revealed that some guards had developed personal relationships with inmates. In the isolated world of the Supermax, where human contact is so rare, even a friendly guard can become a lifeline. And some inmates knew exactly how to exploit that. They would start small, asking for a little favor, like getting a newspaper. The guard thinks, what's the harm? But then the requests get bigger, more serious, more criminal. By the time the guard realizes what's happening, they're in way too deep. This is how notorious figures like Bassam Hamzy allegedly ran their criminal enterprises from inside the Supermax. This is how messages got out and orders were given. The prison system tried to crack down. Guards were rotated more frequently, surveillance was increased, and penalties were made harsher. But the problem persisted. Because at the end of the day, guards are human. They can be manipulated, they can be bribed, and some, unfortunately, are corrupt. Despite these challenges, Goulburn Supermax continues to operate. It holds Australia's most dangerous criminals and continues to evolve. Overcrowding has become a problem again. New threats have emerged, like terrorist offenders and radicalized inmates who pose different kinds of dangers. The prison has had to adapt with new security measures and counter-radicalization programs. But its core purpose remains the same: to contain the worst of the worst. The story of Goulburn Supermax is far from over. In fact, we're just getting started. What you've heard so far is just the surface. The real story, the human story, the shocking story that will make you question everything you think you know about justice and punishment. That story is still to come. Because inside those walls, things are happening that most people can't even imagine. Things that force us to ask, what do we do with monsters? And how do we keep society safe while still holding on to our own humanity? 6 o'clock in the morning. That's when the day begins at Goulburn Supermax. But for the men inside, the day never really ends. Because when you're locked in a cell the size of a small bathroom, when the walls never change and the ceiling never moves, time becomes something different. Something twisted. Something that can break your mind if you're not careful. Let me walk you through a day in the life of a Supermax inmate. The cell lights turn on automatically at 6 a.m. You wake up on a steel bed bolted to the floor, with just a thin pad for a mattress. The harsh fluorescent light from the ceiling is beyond your control. You've been here long enough to know that fighting it only makes things worse. You look around. Steel toilet and sink in one unit. A small shelf. A tiny desk. And that tiny, reinforced window showing you nothing but a patch of sky. No trees. No birds. Just sky. If you're lucky, you have a small TV, sealed behind thick plastic. It's your only connection to the outside world, but even that is restricted. Breakfast comes at 7 a.m. through a slot in your door. A tray with basic food, just enough to keep you alive. You eat alone, in silence. At 8 a.m., if you've earned it, you get 1 hour of exercise in a small concrete yard attached to your cell. High walls, razor wire, and cameras watching your every move. You walk in circles, do push-ups, anything to feel something other than the numbness. Then, the hour is up. Back to the cell. The door locks. And you're alone again. The rest of your day stretches out before you like an empty road. Some inmates read. Some write letters, which are always read by guards. Some just sit and stare at the walls. And some break. Experts say solitary confinement for more than 15 days can cause permanent psychological damage. Men in Goulburn have been in isolation for years. You start hearing things. Voices. You talk to yourself because the silence is crushing. Some inmates bang on their doors for hours until their hands bleed. Self-harm is common, a desperate attempt to force a change, even if it's just a trip to the hospital. So what's the alternative? These aren't innocent people. They're men who've committed horrific crimes. Men like Bilal Scaff. In 2000, Scaff led a group that carried out a series of brutal gang rapes across Sydney, targeting young women and teenage girls. He showed no remorse, even laughing when his 55-year sentence was read out. He was a target in regular prison. Other inmates, disgusted by his crimes, planned to attack him. So, they moved him to Supermax. Full isolation. 23 hours a day in his cell. If you finding this story eye-opening and want to stay updated on true crime that most people never hear about, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. And drop a comment below. What do you think should happen to people like this? Can they ever be rehabilitated? Scaff's sentence was later reduced on appeal. He'll be eligible for parole in 2033. The judge who sentenced him said that when Scaff is released, everyone will want to watch out because he will be just as menacing then as he is now. This is the reality of Supermax. It holds men who have shown no ability to change. Visiting an inmate here is a tightly controlled process. After weeks of background checks, you arrive for your scheduled visit. Security is like an airport. You go to a small booth and see your loved one through thick glass, talking through a phone. No hugs. No holding hands. Some inmates haven't felt human touch in years. Visits are short, monitored, and heartbreaking for families. They didn't commit the crimes, but in a way, they're serving a sentence too. In April 2020, as COVID-19 locked down the world, the simmering tensions inside Australia's most secure prison, Goulburn Supermax, finally erupted. With family visits suspended, the already isolated inmates were cut off completely. On a Thursday afternoon, a group of prisoners in the maximum security wing refused to return to their cells. They started shouting, banging, and climbing on shade structures. Then they began throwing canned food at officers and lighting small fires. This wasn't just random anger. It was a full-blown protest that spiraled into a 5-hour riot. As the chaos escalated, with inmates nearly tearing down fence panels, guards struggled to regain control. The situation was deteriorating fast. Gas flooded the yards. forcing the choking, coughing inmates back. By 6:45 p.m., the riot was over, but it left a chilling question. What caused it? Prison officials and the guards' union pointed to one thing: drugs. Or rather, the lack of them. With visits canceled, the main channel for smuggling contraband was shut down. Inmates were going through forced withdrawal, and their desperation was explosive. Some even swallowed razor blades, deliberately injuring themselves just to get to a hospital where they had arranged for drugs to be dropped off. This is the level of manipulation and desperation inside Goulburn. This riot was just the tip of the iceberg. In the months leading up to it, the prison was described as being at a melting point. There were multiple riots, assaults on officers, a stabbing, and even 2 hostage situations. Guards weren't just afraid for their safety at work. They were being threatened with violence outside the prison walls, told they'd be shot on their way home. But the danger isn't just from the inmates. There's a darker secret: corruption within the ranks. Over the years, several Goulburn guards have been caught smuggling contraband like drugs and mobile phones. How does this happen? It starts with manipulation. Inmates are masters at reading people. They'll start a friendly conversation, build a little trust, and then ask for a small, seemingly harmless favor, like passing a note. Once the guard crosses that first line, the inmate has leverage. The requests get bigger: a book, a phone, and then drugs. By then, the guard is trapped. Refuse, and the inmate threatens to expose them, costing them their job and their freedom. It's how notorious figures like Bassam Hamzy allegedly continued to run criminal enterprises from behind bars. In response to these constant challenges, Goulburn Supermax underwent a major renovation, completed in April 2020. This Supermax 2.0 boasted high-tech security, like drone detection systems. But it also introduced something radical: a step-down unit. This was a separate area for inmates who showed a real commitment to change. The idea was to offer a pathway, a glimmer of hope. It was a chance for inmates, including radicalized terrorists, to engage in programs designed to challenge their violent ideologies. Of course, this was controversial. Many believe these men don't deserve a second chance. But experts argue that simply locking someone away in total isolation for decades might only create a more dangerous person upon release. The step-down unit is an experiment, an attempt to find a middle ground between punishment and rehabilitation. The results are still being studied, but its existence raises a fundamental question. Can the worst of the worst truly change? Think about the guards who work there. It's not a job, it's a daily battle in a psychological war zone. They work in pairs, never one-on-one with an inmate, to prevent corruption and ensure safety. But the mental toll is immense. They face constant threats, manipulation, and the psychological burden of being surrounded by extreme violence. Many suffer from anxiety, PTSD, and depression. They carry the prison home with them. Some quit, but others stay, believing they are the necessary line between society and its most dangerous members. Right now, inside Goulburn's walls, inmates are living out their sentences. Some are planning, some are surviving. The guards are watching, trying to maintain order. But the biggest questions remain. Is this place about justice or revenge? Are we making society safer, or just creating monsters? The story of Goulburn Supermax forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about crime, punishment, and the possibility of redemption. There's a question that haunts Goulburn Supermax. A question nobody wants to ask out loud, but everyone is thinking. What happens when you lock a human being in a cage for years? What happens to their mind, their humanity? And most importantly, what happens when you eventually let them out? Before we answer that, I need to tell you about another prison. A prison that existed before Goulburn, that was supposed to be the solution to Australia's most dangerous criminals. A prison that failed so spectacularly, it was shut down after just 3 years. Its name was Kattingal. The year was 1975. The government decided they needed a new approach for the most violent inmates. So they built something revolutionary. Kattingal. The name comes from an Aboriginal word meaning separation from social control. And that's exactly what it did. 40 cells, no windows, electronic doors, and cameras everywhere. Inmates spent their entire day in a cell with nothing but a bed and a toilet. Everything was passed to them through a slot in the door on the end of a stick. No human contact. No programs. No hope. Sound familiar? It should. Because Kattingal was the blueprint for every Supermax prison that came after it, including Goulburn. But here's what they didn't expect. It destroyed people. Inmates began to break down psychologically within weeks. They screamed, banged on walls until their hands bled, and some even attempted to take their own lives. The isolation wasn't just punishment, it was torture. Human rights groups were horrified. An inquiry was launched, and its findings were damning. Containment was causing serious psychological harm. In 1978, just 3 years after it opened, it was shut down and later demolished. But the idea didn't die. 23 years later, in 2001, Goulburn Supermax opened. Built on the same principles as containment, isolation, and control, but with some lessons learned. Goulburn was designed to be slightly more humane. Cells had windows. Some inmates could have televisions. There were programs, at least in theory. The goal wasn't just to punish, but to manage dangerous people while still recognizing they were human. But is it working? Or are we just repeating the same mistakes? Research shows that prolonged solitary confinement causes permanent psychological damage. The United Nations says more than 15 days can be considered torture. 15 days. Some inmates in Goulburn Supermax have been in isolation for over 10 years. Studies show this causes anxiety, depression, hallucinations, and paranoia. Inmates forget how to function in society. They develop what's called prison psychosis, losing track of reality itself. And here's the terrifying part. Most of these men will eventually be released. They walk out the gates, but they aren't the same people who went in. Imagine spending 15 years in a box and then suddenly being expected to get a job, find housing, and reintegrate. Many can't. They reoffend and go back to prison because it's the only place they understand. It's a terrible, destructive cycle. But there's another side to this story. For all its problems, Goulburn Supermax has achieved something important. It has contained Australia's most dangerous criminals without a single escape. Not one. These men, serial killers, gang leaders, terrorists, are locked away where they can't hurt anyone else. Think of Bassam Hamzy, who allegedly continued to run his gang from isolation. Or Ivan Milat, the backpacker killer, who showed no remorse and tried to escape. Was isolation cruel? Maybe. But was it necessary? This is the impossible balance Goulburn Supermax tries to strike. In 2019, something changed. A new step-down unit was opened. If an inmate shows good behavior and a commitment to change, they can be moved to a unit with slightly less harsh conditions. The idea was revolutionary. You can't just lock people away and expect them to magically change. You have to provide therapy and counter-radicalization programs. It's controversial, but punishment without rehabilitation is pointless. You risk creating a ticking time bomb. This step-down unit is an experiment, an attempt to find a middle ground between justice and mercy. Then, in 2020, the entire Supermax underwent a massive renovation. New security features like drone detection, advanced surveillance, and an increased capacity. But more importantly, new programs, education opportunities, and mental health services. The prison system was finally acknowledging that isolation alone doesn't work. It's an evolution, from the pure punishment of containment to a more managed containment. It's not perfect, but it's an attempt to become better. Goulburn shows us the constant, difficult struggle of how a society deals with its worst offenders, a struggle that is far from over. December 14th, 2025. A warm summer day at Bondi Beach. Families, tourists, people enjoying the sun and surf. And then, pure terror. A mass shooting. 15 people killed. Dozens injured. It was the deadliest attack in Australian history. The shooter, a 24-year-old man, was caught and charged. And just a few weeks ago, in January 2026, he was moved from Long Bay Jail to Goulburn Correctional Center, to the Supermax. He will now spend his entire life in a cell, in isolation, in the most secure prison in Australia. He is now considered one of the most dangerous people in the country. When this news broke, some people cheered. Good, they said. Let him rot. But others felt uneasy. This young man, barely an adult, sentenced to decades of isolation. What will that do to him? And more importantly, what does it say about us as a society that our solution to horrific violence is more violence? There are no easy answers here. Let's be clear. The people in Goulburn Supermax are not victims. They are criminals. Many have done things so horrible they're hard to even describe. Ivan Milat, who tortured and murdered 7 young backpackers. Bilal Scaff, who led a gang that committed brutal rapes. Bassam Hamzy, who allegedly killed a man in prison and continued to run a criminal empire from his cell. These men chose violence. They chose to destroy lives. They deserve to be locked away where they can't hurt anyone else. But here's the thing. Punishment and torture are not the same. Justice and cruelty are not the same. These two truths can exist at the same time. Around the world, countries are grappling with the same questions. The US has supermax prisons like ADX Florence. Russia has the Black Dolphin. And everywhere, the debate rages. Are these prisons necessary? Are they effective? Are they humane? Some countries are moving away from extreme isolation, finding it doesn't actually reduce violence. Others are doubling down, arguing some criminals are simply too dangerous for anything else. Australia is somewhere in the middle. Goulburn Supermax exists and operates. But there's also a recognition that pure isolation isn't the answer. The creation of a step-down unit, rehabilitation programs, and mental health services are all attempts to find a better way, to balance security with humanity, to acknowledge that even the worst people are still people. They're sentenced to life in Goulburn Supermax, 23 hours a day in a cell, no human contact, no hope, until they're old and broken. Would that be justice? Would it make society safer? Or would it just be cruelty? Revenge disguised as justice? These are uncomfortable questions with no clear answers. But they're questions we need to ask. Because Goulburn Supermax isn't just a prison. It's a reflection of who we are as a society. It's a statement about what we believe justice looks like and where we draw the line between punishment and torture. Right now, inside those walls, men sit in cells. Some are counting the days until they die. Others are trying to change, trying to prove they're more than the worst thing they've ever done. And we, as a society, are trying to figure out what to do with our monsters. How we treat them, how we balance justice and mercy, punishment and rehabilitation, security and humanity. That's what defines us. What do you think? Where should we draw the line? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.